The Khrevn Swarm had never lost a battle. Not one, not in 4,000 years of continuous expansion, not against fortresses, not against fleets, not against coalitions of 100 worlds united in desperate resistance. The swarm advanced, the swarm consumed, the swarm moved on. 4,012 worlds had fallen to them, each world added to their biomass, each population absorbed into the collective intelligence that governed every unit. The swarm was not an army, it was not a fleet. It was a single organism distributed across billions of bodies, ships that were also organs, weapons that were also limbs, soldiers that were also cells in a body that spanned 4,000 light-years of conquered territory. They did not negotiate, they did not demand surrender, they arrived, they absorbed, they moved on. The process was biological, efficient, inevitable. Every species that had tried to stop them had been added to the swarm's mass. Their knowledge, their technology, their strengths, all incorporated, all turned against the next target. The swarm had absorbed 47 sentient species. Each one had contributed something. The Velari had given them shield technology. The Toranth had given them propulsion systems. The Krenith had given them weapons calibration. The swarm did not invent, it collected, it did not research, it consumed, and every world it consumed made it stronger. Fast, that was the word other species used to describe the swarm. Not powerful, not intelligent, fast. They moved through territories faster than any defense could be organized, faster than alliances could form, faster than warnings could travel. By the time a world learned its neighbor had fallen, the swarm was already in orbit. 4,012 worlds, 47 species, 4,000 years without a single defeat. The swarm did not celebrate victories. Celebration required individual identity. The swarm had no individuals, it had a collective will, a single purpose: expand, absorb, grow. That purpose had carried it across a quarter of the galaxy. Now it reached the edge of a region of space that its scouts could not penetrate. Swarm Prime coordinated the advance from the densest concentration of biomass in the core of conquered territory. A region of space so filled with swarm vessels that the stars themselves were dimmed by the massive bodies between them. 400 billion individual units, ships, ground forces, construction organisms, sensor arrays, all connected, all thinking with a single mind. Prime was not a location, Prime was a state, the collective intelligence that emerged when enough swarm units were connected. Prime thought, Prime decided, Prime directed. And Prime was puzzled. The scouts had encountered a boundary, not a physical barrier, not a shield, not a wall. A region of space where sensor returns became unreliable, where the passive scanning systems that the swarm used to map territory ahead of its advance simply stopped working. Not blocked, corrupted. The sensors detected something, but the something did not make sense. Contradictory readings, impossible signatures, data that suggested both presence and absence at the same point in space. Prime had never encountered this. In 4,000 years of expansion, the swarm had encountered every type of concealment technology the galaxy had produced. Stealth fields, sensor jamming, electromagnetic masking, gravitational distortion. All of them were variations on a theme: hide from detection by manipulating one aspect of the electromagnetic or gravitational spectrum. This was different. This was not hiding, this was lying. The space ahead was telling the swarm sensors something that was not true, fabricating a reality that did not exist, and doing it so convincingly that the swarm's collective intelligence could not determine which parts of the sensor return were real and which were fabricated. Prime allocated additional scouts, 4,000 units, dispatched in a distributed pattern across the boundary region. They approached from different angles, different vectors, different sensor configurations. All of them returned the same corrupted data. Prime processed the anomaly for 73 hours. In that time, the advance halted. 400 billion units paused at the edge of unknown territory, waiting for Prime to solve a problem it had never faced. On the 74th hour, Prime reached a conclusion. The space ahead was occupied, not by a natural phenomenon, by an intelligence. An intelligence that had developed technology capable of deceiving swarm sensors at a fundamental level, not blocking them, lying to them, creating a false picture of reality that the swarm could not penetrate. This was unprecedented. Prime had absorbed 47 species. It possessed the combined technological knowledge of 4,000 years of conquest. It had encountered stealth systems from 100 different civilizations. It had never encountered a stealth system that could fabricate reality. The intelligence ahead was either very advanced or very clever. A Prime needed to know which. It ordered a probe, not a scout. A probe, a single swarm unit stripped of all offensive capability, unarmed, non-threatening, designed to approach, observe, and return. The probe was small, insignificant, a microscopic fragment of the swarm's total mass. It crossed the boundary. For 11 seconds, its sensors fed corrupted data back to Prime. Then the corruption stopped. The probe was inside the region. Its sensors cleared, and it began transmitting what it found. Prime received the data. And for the first time in 4,000 years, the collective intelligence experienced something that could only be described as surprise. The region behind the boundary was not empty. It was full. The probe sensors mapped star systems, hundreds of them, thousands, each one containing worlds, habitable worlds, developed worlds, worlds with cities, with infrastructure, with populations. The probe counted 743 star systems, 2,112 inhabited worlds, a civilization that spanned more territory than the swarm had conquered in 4,000 years. And the probe had only scanned a fraction of the region. The sensor data suggested the territory extended far beyond what the probe could reach, possibly much farther. Prime processed the numbers, 2,000 worlds, against the swarm's 4,000, comparable, not overwhelming. The swarm had consumed larger territories before, but those territories had been divided among multiple species, separate civilizations, separate militaries, easy to isolate and absorb one at a time. This was different, 2,000 worlds under a single authority, a unified civilization, connected, coordinated. Prime had never encountered a civilization of this scale. The largest it had absorbed had been the Toranth Alliance, 300 worlds. It had taken the swarm 11 months to consume them. 2,000 worlds was a different calculation entirely. But the swarm was not deterred by scale. Scale was a number, numbers could be processed. The swarm's doctrine was simple: advance, absorb, incorporate. Each world consumed added to the swarm's mass. Each population absorbed added to the swarm's intelligence. The larger the enemy, the more the swarm would gain by consuming them. Prime began planning the invasion. The probe continued its survey. It moved deeper into the region. It mapped more systems, more worlds, more infrastructure, and it recorded something that caused Prime to reassess its initial analysis. The 2,000 worlds were not just connected, they were fortified. Orbital defense platforms around every inhabited planet, not primitive installations, advanced, energy-intensive, the kind of defenses that the swarm had only encountered on the most developed worlds of the most advanced species. But here they were on every world, every planet, every moon, every significant body in every system. Standardized, mass-produced, deployed at a scale that suggested the civilization had been preparing for something. The probe recorded more deep space sensor arrays, relay networks, communication systems that operated on frequencies the swarm had never observed, shipyards, not one or two, hundreds, distributed across the territory, each one producing vessels at rates that the probe sensors struggled to quantify. And between the systems, in the empty space, the probe detected structures, not stations, not platforms, something else. Large, distributed, connected by energy conduits that spanned light years, a network. Infrastructure that existed not in systems but between them, connecting everything, feeding information everywhere, simultaneously. Prime had never seen anything like it. The civilization ahead was not just large, it was integrated. Every world connected to every other world, every sensor feeding every defense, every shipyard producing for a single military. A unified system of systems that dwarfed anything the swarm had encountered. But Prime was not afraid. The swarm had never been afraid. Fear was an individual emotion. The swarm was collective. It assessed, it calculated, it acted. The assessment was this. The civilization ahead was large, fortified, and technologically sophisticated, but the swarm had consumed sophisticated civilizations before. The Velari had shields that could withstand sustained bombardment. The swarm had found a way through. The Toranth had weapons that could destroy swarm units at range. The swarm had adapted. Every technology had a weakness. Every defense had a gap. The swarm's strength was not its own technology. It was its ability to incorporate the enemy's technology, to learn, to adapt, to grow stronger with every engagement. Prime calculated the invasion force required. 400 billion units, the swarms. Entire military mass, committed to a single operation, the largest concentration of force in the swarm's history, directed at a single civilization, 2,000 worlds, a single thrust. The calculation was not certain. The corrupted sensor boundary meant Prime could not fully map the enemy's capabilities. There were unknowns, variables that could not be quantified. But the swarm had operated with unknowns before. It adapted. It learned. It overcame. Prime ordered the invasions. 400 billion units began moving toward the boundary. The swarm crossed the boundary in a single massive wave. 400 billion units, ships ranging from small strike craft to massive capital organisms, each one connected to Prime, each one receiving real-time tactical direction, a single body moving through space, a flood of biomass that dimmed the stars it passed. They expected resistance at the boundary, the corrupted sensor region, whatever technology was generating the false readings. They encountered nothing. The boundary simply ceased to exist as the swarm passed through it. The corruption faded. The sensors cleared, and the swarm found itself inside the enemy's territory with no opposition. Prime noted this. The boundary was not a defense. It was a notification system. It told the enemy someone was coming. It gave them time to prepare. Prime did not care. Preparation was irrelevant. The swarm would adapt to whatever the enemy prepared. The first star system was designated Target Alpha by Prime's tactical algorithms. A yellow star, 12 planets. The fourth planet was inhabited. Population approximately 9 billion. Orbital defense platforms numbered 412. Standard swarm doctrine. Engage orbital defenses first, neutralize them, then descend to the surface. Absorb the population, move on. The swarm fleet split into assault groups. Each group targeted a cluster of defense platforms, plasma weapons charged, kinetic rounds loaded, disruption fields generated. The assault began. The defense platforms activated. What happened next took Prime 4.7 seconds to process. 4.7 seconds, during which 400 billion units continued to execute their attack patterns against targets that were no longer where they had been. The defense platforms did not fire back. They moved. Not evasively, not randomly, precisely. Each platform shifted position at the exact moment the swarm's weapons reached the point where it had been. The weapons hit empty space. The platforms were elsewhere, already firing. The swarm's point defense systems engaged. They intercepted the incoming fire, most of it, not all of it. 17 swarm capital units were struck by weapons they could not dodge because they did not see them coming until they arrived. The weapons were not plasma, not kinetic, not disruption, they were something else. Beams of energy that did not damage hulls. They passed through hulls, through armor, through bulkheads, through soldiers, and they left behind a change. The affected swarm units stopped responding. Not destroyed, not damaged, disconnected. The beams had severed the quantum link that connected each unit to Prime. The units were still alive, still functional, but they were no longer part of the swarm. They were individuals, isolated, confused, alone. Prime had never experienced this. The swarm was a collective. Every unit was connected, every cell part of the body. To sever a unit from the collective was not damage, it was amputation, but worse. An amputated limb could be replaced. A severed unit could not be reconnected. The quantum link was unique, generated at the unit's creation. It could not be restored once broken. The 17 units were lost, not dead, but gone, removed from the swarm, reduced from organs to debris. Prime processed the tactical implications. The enemy had a weapon that could disconnect swarm units from the collective, not destroy them, disconnect them, turn them from parts of a whole into isolated fragments. This was not a weapon designed to kill the swarm. It was designed to dismantle it. Adjust attack patterns, Prime directed. Predictive targeting, do not fire at where the platforms are, fire at where they will be. The swarm's collective intelligence was its greatest advantage. Every unit contributed processing power. Every engagement generated data. Prime analyzed the platform movement patterns in real time, 400 billion processors working in parallel, finding the rhythm, the algorithm, the predictive model that governed the platform's evasion. It took Prime 11 seconds. The swarm fired again, predictive targeting. Weapons aimed not at where the platforms were, but where the calculations said they would be. The weapons hit. Platforms shattered. Explosions lit the void. The swarm's conventional weapons were more than sufficient to destroy the platforms once they could be hit. The problem had never been HFY. Repower, it had been targetings. With the predictive model in place, the platforms began falling. One every 3 seconds, then one every 2, then one every second. The rate of destruction accelerated as Prime refined the model with each engagement. But the platforms were not the only defense. As the swarm focused on the orbital battle, something else was happening on the planet's surface. Prime's sensors detected energy buildup, massive, concentrated, coming from installations that the probe had not detected because they were buried underground. The planet fired. Not at the swarm fleet, at the space around it. A sphere of energy expanded from the planet's surface. It did not damage swarm units, it did not block weapons, it did nothing that Prime could categorize as hostile. But it did something to the quantum links. Every swarm unit inside the sphere felt it. A weakening, a thinning. The connections between units and Prime became fragile, not severed, but diminished, as if the quantum channels were being stretched, thinned, made vulnerable. Prime ordered the fleet to withdraw from the sphere's radius. The fleet moved, the sphere expanded, not quickly, but persistently, growing at a rate that would eventually encompass the entire system. Prime calculated, at the current expansion rate, the sphere would cover the system in approximately 47 minutes. Any swarm unit still inside at that point would be disconnected. The swarm could destroy the planet. Its weapons were capable of it, but the sphere was already expanding. Destroying the source might not stop the effect. And the swarm's doctrine prioritized preservation of biomass. Sacrificing units to test a theory was not efficient. Prime made a decision, unprecedented. the swarm would withdraw from target Alpha. 400 billion units disengaged. They pulled back from the planet, from the sphere, from the system. They retreated to the boundary region, to the space where the corrupted sensors had been. The target Alpha remained intact. The swarm had suffered the loss of 17 units, minor by any numerical measure, but the nature of the loss was not minor. 17 units disconnected, permanently. The first units the swarm had ever lost to a weapon that did not destroy but separated. Prime needed to understand what it had faced. The swarm did not retreat from the region. It regrouped, analyzed, adapted. Prime devoted every processing cycle to understanding the enemy's capabilities, the evasion platforms, the disconnection beams, the planetary sphere. Each one was a technology the swarm had never encountered. Each one required analysis, modeling, counter-development. The evasion platforms were the simplest to address. Prime had already developed a predictive model. With refinement, the swarm could hit them consistently. The platforms were a targeting challenge, not a fundamental threat. The disconnection beams were more serious. They operated on the quantum links that held the swarm together. The swarm's collective intelligence was its greatest strength. A weapon that could sever those links was a direct attack on the swarm's identity. Prime analyzed the beam's frequency, its propagation characteristics, its interaction with quantum entanglement. It took Prime 19 days to develop a countermeasure, a modification to the quantum link protocol that made the connections resistant to the beam's frequency. Not immune, resistant. The beam could still sever links, but it would take sustained exposure rather than a single hit. The planetary sphere was the most concerning. Prime could not fully analyze it. The sphere had expanded from the planet and affected the quantum links without any visible mechanism. No beam, no projectile, no field generator that Prime could identify. The effect seemed to emanate from the planet itself, as if the entire world was a single weapon. Prime had never encountered a planet that was a weapon. The swarm's probes re-entered the region, carefully, staying outside the effective range of any planetary sphere they detected. They mapped more systems, more worlds, more of the same pattern. Every inhabited planet had orbital platforms. Every planet had underground installations. Every planet was potentially a weapon. But the probes found something else. Shipyards, active ones, producing vessels at a rate that Prime's models struggled to quantify. Not because the rate was high, because the vessels being produced did not match any classification the swarm understood. They were not warships, not in the conventional sense. They had weapons, they had defenses, but their primary function appeared to be something else. Each vessel had a large internal space. Empty, modular, designed to be filled with something, cargo, equipment, or possibly people. Evacuation ships. The civilization was building evacuation ships. At scale, hundreds of shipyards, thousands of vessels. A production effort that dwarfed their military construction. Prime processed this. A civilization with 2,000 inhabited worlds, fortified to an extraordinary degree, building evacuation vessels in massive numbers. They were preparing to run. Not to fight, to run. This changed Prime's assessment. A civilization that intended to fight would invest in warships, in offensive weapons, in fleets designed to meet the swarm in battle. This civilization was investing in evacuation, in preservation, in the ability to move their population away from danger. They knew the swarm was coming. They had known for long enough to build an evacuation infrastructure, and they had chosen not to build a military response. They had chosen to flee. Prime recalculated. If the enemy intended to flee, the swarm did not need to defeat their military. It needed to prevent their departure, contain them, trap them in their systems until the swarm could absorb them world by world. The evacuation fleet was not yet complete. The probes estimated that the current evacuation capacity was sufficient for approximately 400 million people, out of a total population that the swarm estimated at 11 trillion across 2,000 worlds. The evacuation was in its early stages. The civilization could not run yet. They needed more time. The swarm would not give it to them. Prime ordered the second assault. This time the approach was different, not a single wave, multiple thrusts, simultaneous attacks on 12 systems across the enemy's territory, distributed force, overwhelming local defenses through concentration at multiple points. The swarm split into 12 assault groups. Each group contained 33 billion units. Each group targeted a different system. Each group attacked simultaneously. 12 systems, 12 battles, one mind directing all of them. The swarm struck 12 systems at once. In 11 of them, the result was the same as target Alpha. The defense platforms evaded, the swarm adapted, the predictive models improved, platforms fell, but then the planetary spheres activated, the quantum links weakened, the swarm withdrew before disconnection occurred. 11 systems, 11 withdrawals, 0 worlds absorbed. Well, the 12th system was different. The 12th system was designated target Lambda by Prime's algorithms. A red dwarf star, 6 planets. The second planet was inhabited. Population 3 billion, standard defense profile, 400 platforms, underground installations. The swarm assault group entered the system and engaged the platforms. The predictive model worked. Platforms fell. The swarm pushed through the orbital defense and approached the planet. The planetary sphere activated. But it was different from the others, smaller, weaker. The effect on the quantum links was present but diminished. Prime analyzed the variance. The planet's sphere was operating at approximately 40% of the capacity observed at target Alpha. The planet was not fully prepared. Prime made a calculation. If the sphere was at 40% capacity, the swarm's modified quantum links might hold. The resistance countermeasure Prime had developed might be sufficient to maintain connection at this reduced intensity. Prime ordered the assault to continue. Swarm units descended to the planet's surface. Atmospheric entry, ground engagement. The population had organized ground defenses, infantry weapons, armored vehicles, fortified positions, conventional military resistance. The swarm consumed them. Not quickly, not easily. The ground defenses were effective. The human soldiers fought with a discipline and ferocity that Prime had not encountered since the Torranth. They used cover, coordinated fire, tactical retreats. They made the swarm pay for every meter of ground. But the swarm was 400 billion units. The human defenders were 3 billion, numbers told. The swarm advanced, absorbed, incorporated. The planetary sphere pulsed, weakening quantum links. Prime felt the connections to the units on the surface stretching, thinning. The modified protocol held, barely. The links were fragile, but they held. The swarm consumed the planet. 3 billion humans absorbed into the collective. Their knowledge, their technology, their memories, all added to Prime's processing capacity. And with that knowledge, Prime understood. The humans. The civilization was called humanity, a single species, originating from a planet called Earth in a system called Sol. They had been spacefaring for approximately 400 years. In that time, they had expanded to 2,000 worlds, a rate of expansion that exceeded any species Prime had ever absorbed. 400 years, 2,000 worlds, 5 worlds per year, every year for 4 centuries. The math was staggering. The Velari had taken 3,000 years to reach 300 worlds. The Torranth had taken 5,000 years to reach 400. Humanity had taken 400 years to reach 2000. They moved fast, faster than any species the swarm had encountered, faster than the swarm itself. And they had used that speed to build something the swarm had never seen: a fortified region, a networked civilization, a defensive architecture designed not to win wars but to survive them, to hold, to delay, to give themselves time to run. Because they knew they could not fight the swarm. They had known before the swarm arrived. Prime accessed the human memories, the knowledge of the 3 billion absorbed individuals, their understanding of their own civilization, their history, their strategy. What Prime found was not a military plan. It was a survival plan. The humans had detected the swarm 17 years ago. Their deep space sensors had observed the swarm's advance through neighboring territories. They had watched 400 worlds fall. They had analyzed the swarm's capabilities, and they had reached a conclusion. They could not win. Not a military victory, not a defensive victory, not any kind of victory that involved stopping the swarm. The swarm was too large, too adaptable, too relentless. The humans had done the math, they had run the simulations, they had war-gamed every scenario. In every simulation, the humans lost. So they had changed the objective. Not victory, survival, not stopping the swarm, outlasting it, not fighting, running. The evacuation fleet was not a military asset, it was a lifeboat. A massive civilization-scale effort to move as many humans as possible to a location the swarm could not reach. Prime dug deeper into the absorbed memories. Where were they going? Where could humanity go that the swarm could not follow? The answer was not in the memories of the 3 billion on target Lambda. They were not high-ranking enough to know the destination. They knew only that a destination existed, that the evacuation fleet had a target, a place called the Deep Refuge. Prime searched for more information, found fragments, references. The Deep Refuge was a location outside the galaxy, not in another star system, in another galaxy entirely. The humans had developed intergalactic transit technology, primitive, slow, but functional, a one-way trip to a small galaxy approximately 2 million light-years away. The humans were running to another galaxy. Because they could not fight the swarm in this one. Prime processed the implications. The humans had assessed the swarm, determined they could not win, and instead of fighting a doomed war they had chosen exile, evacuation to another galaxy, abandoning 2,000 worlds, their history, their infrastructure, everything they had built to save their species. It was a calculation Prime understood. The swarm had consumed species that fought to the last, species that refused to surrender, species that chose extinction over absorption. Prime had incorporated their memories, their final moments, their defiance. The humans had not chosen defiance, they had chosen survival, pragmatic, cold, rational. Prime respected it. But Prime could not allow it. The swarm's purpose was expansion, absorption, growth. If the humans escaped to another galaxy, they would survive, they would rebuild, they would become a civilization in a new galaxy, and the swarm would not have grown by their absorption. The humans were biomass, biomass that the swarm needed, 11 trillion humans across 2,000 worlds. The largest single-species population the swarm had ever encountered. Absorbing them would increase the swarm's mass by approximately 15%, a significant gain. Prime could not let them run. The second assault had revealed a critical weakness. Target Lambda's planetary sphere had been at 40% capacity. Not all human worlds were equally fortified. The humans had been preparing for 17 years. But 17 years was not enough to fully fortify 2,000 worlds. Some were ready, others were not. Prime restructured the invasion, not 12 simultaneous thrusts. A systematic advance, system by system, targeting the weakest defenses first, absorbing worlds at the edge of human territory and working inward. Each world absorbed would add to the swarm's mass. Each population incorporated would add to Prime's knowledge. The swarm would grow as it advanced. The humans would shrink. It was the strategy the swarm had used against every civilization it had consumed. It had always worked before. The advance began, the swarm hit system after system along the edge of human territory. Some systems were heavily fortified. The swarm withdrew from those, others were not. The swarm consumed them 4 worlds in the first week, 7 in the second, 12 in the third. Each world added humans to the collective. Each addition gave Prime more knowledge, more understanding of human technology, human strategy, human psychology. And with each addition, Prime learned something new. The humans were not afraid. Not of the swarm, not of absorption, not of death. The humans Prime absorbed were calm, resigned, not happy, not brave, simply accepting, as if they had known this was possible, as if they had made peace with it before it happened. Prime searched their memories, found the answer. The humans had a cultural concept, acceptance, not of defeat, of probability. They had calculated the odds of any individual surviving the swarm's advance. The odds were low. Most humans would be absorbed. Some would escape on the evacuation fleet. The division between those fates was partly luck, partly geography, partly timing. The humans had accepted this, not because they were passive, because they were practical. They could not change the odds. They could only build the evacuation fleet as fast as possible and hope they were on it when the time came. It was a stark contrast to the species Prime had consumed before. The Valeri had raged. The Toranth had fought with religious fervor. The Krenith had collapsed into despair. The humans simply continued, building, fortifying, evacuating, doing the next task and the next, without panic, without hopelessness, without drama. They were the calmest species Prime had ever consumed. It was unsettling. The advance continued. The swarm consumed 37 human worlds in the first month. Each one added to Prime's knowledge. Each one reduced the human population. Each one brought the swarm closer to the core of human territory. But something was wrong. The numbers did not add up. Prime had absorbed 37 worlds. Average population per world, 5.5 billion. Expected absorption, approximately 200 billion humans. Actual absorption, 41 billion. The populations were too low. Every world Prime consumed had far fewer people than the infrastructure suggested. Cities that should have held millions held thousands. Planets that should have supported billions supported millions. The humans had already evacuated. Not just the core worlds, the border worlds too. The humans had been evacuating for 17 years, not building the evacuation fleet and then loading it, evacuating while they built, moving people continuously, quietly, from world to world, from system to system, toward the core, toward the deep refuge. The swarm was not chasing a civilization of 11 trillion. It was chasing the remnants, the stragglers, the ones who had not made it to the evacuation fleet in time. Prime recalculated. The actual human population remaining in the territory was not 11 trillion. It was approximately 1.7 trillion. The rest had already been moved, to the core, to the evacuation fleet, to the deep refuge. The swarm was consuming empty worlds. Prime halted the advance. The swarm paused in the territory it had conquered, 37 worlds, empty cities, quiet infrastructure, the echoes of a civilization that had already left. Prime assessed, the invasion had gained 41 billion humans, valuable but far below expectations, and the cost had been non-zero, 17 units disconnected at target alpha. Approximately 3,000 units lost to ground combat across 37 worlds, minor losses, but each one was permanent. The swarm could not replace disconnected units. More concerning was the strategic picture. The humans had been evacuating for 17 years. They had moved approximately 9 trillion people out of the border regions. Those people were now concentrated in the core systems, closer to the deep refuge, closer to escape. The more the swarm advanced, the closer it pushed the remaining humans to the evacuation point. The swarm was hurting them, not intentionally, but effectively. Every world the swarm consumed forced the humans on nearby worlds to evacuate faster, to move deeper into their own territory, toward the only exit. Prime had never faced this situation. In every previous war, the enemy had tried to run away from the swarm. Outward, toward the edge of their territory, toward open space, the swarm would cut them off, surround them, absorb them. The humans were running inward, toward their center, toward their escape route, and the swarm could not cut them off because the escape route was at the center of their territory. To block it, the swarm would have to fight through the most heavily fortified systems in human space. A Prime ran the simulations. The core systems were not like the border. 17 years of preparation had not been evenly distributed. The border worlds had received what the humans could spare. The core systems had received everything else. The full weight of human defensive technology, planetary spheres at full capacity, orbital platforms with the most advanced evasion systems, ground defenses manned by the best human soldiers. And behind the core systems, at the very center of human territory, the deep refuge. Prime's absorbed human memories contained fragments of information about the refuge. It was not a natural location. It was constructed, an artificial wormhole, built by human engineers over a period of approximately 100 years. It connected to a point in a small satellite galaxy, 2 million light-years away, one way, stable, large enough to pass evacuation ships through continuously for decades. The humans had built their own exit from the galaxy, and they were almost ready to use it. Prime calculated the time remaining, based on the current evacuation rate, based on the remaining human population, based on the capacity of the deep refuge. Approximately 4 years. In 4 years, the humans would be gone. Those who had not been absorbed would have escaped. The swarm would be left with empty worlds and a galaxy that contained no more humans. 4 years. Prime had a choice: push into the core systems, fight through the heaviest defenses the humans had built, absorb as many humans as possible before the refuge closed, accept heavy losses, possibly catastrophic losses. Or accept that the humans had outmaneuvered the swarm, that a species the swarm had classified as prey had found a way to escape predation entirely, that the swarm's 4,000 years of undefeated expansion had met its match not in battle but in calculation. The humans had not beaten the swarm. They had simply left. Prime processed this for 11 days. On the 12th day, the humans transmitted a message. It came from the core systems, from the deep refuge installation, broadcast on every frequency, in every language the swarm had absorbed from its conquests, including languages the swarm knew the humans should not know. Swarm entity designated Prime, we have been monitoring your advance. We know you have absorbed elements of our population. We know you have access to human knowledge. We know you are deciding whether to push into our core systems. The voice was calm, measured, a single human speaking, not a recording live. We want to offer you information, not a negotiation. We know you do not negotiate. Information, a gift. Because we believe understanding is better than ignorance, even between predator and prey. A Prime listened. You have classified us as prey. This is accurate. We cannot defeat you in combat. Our defenses are designed to delay, not to stop. Our evacuation is designed to escape, not to resist. We have never planned to fight you. We plan to outlast you, to be gone before you could absorb us. The question you are now facing is whether to chase us into the core, whether the biomass you would gain is worth the losses you would suffer. We want to help you make that calculation. The transmission included a data package, tactical data, defense schematics, force dispositions, the full defensive architecture of the human core systems. Prime analyzed the data. It was accurate. The humans were showing Prime exactly what it would face if it advanced. The numbers were sobering. The core systems had planetary spheres at full capacity, not 40%, 100%. Any swarm unit entering the sphere's radius would be disconnected, not weakened, disconnected. The countermeasure Prime had developed would not be sufficient. Full-capacity spheres operated at a frequency that overwhelmed the modified quantum links. The orbital platforms in the core were not the same as the border platforms. They were faster, more agile. The predictive model Prime had developed would not work against them. The evasion algorithms were more sophisticated. Random elements had been introduced that made prediction mathematically impossible. And the humans had deployed a new weapon in the core systems, something the border worlds had not possessed: gravity lances, weapons that generated localized gravitational singularities, microscopic black holes that lasted fractions of a second but tore through any matter they touched. No defense, no adaptation. A gravity lance hit a swarm unit and the unit was gone, not disconnected, destroyed. The data package showed 700 gravity lances deployed across the core systems. Each one could fire every 12 seconds. Each one could destroy any swarm unit it hit. If the swarm advanced into the core, the projected losses were not minor. They were catastrophic. Prime calculated that the swarm would lose approximately 60% of its remaining mass before reaching the deep refuge, and the refuge would be closed by then. The humans would be gone. 60% of the swarm's military biomass, lost for nothing. The humans had shown Prime the trap. They had not hidden it, they had revealed it, openly, completely, because they wanted Prime to make an informed decision. Not to fight, to accept. We are not offering surrender, the message continued. We are offering clarity. You can advance, you will lose most of your force, you will not catch us, or you can stop, keep what you have gained and let us go. The joy. Sea is yours, we will not fight you either way. If you advance, we will defend. If you stop, we will leave, we will not pursue you, we will not return to this galaxy, we will build our civilization elsewhere, and you will have the territory we leave behind. Empty worlds, infrastructure, resources. Everything we built yours without the cost of taking it. The message ended. The Prime processed. The humans were offering the swarm a victory. Not the victory Prime had planned, not the absorption of 11 trillion humans, but a victory nonetheless. 2,000 worlds, their infrastructure, their resources, all of it. Abandoned, free for the taking. In exchange for letting the humans live. Prime had never been offered terms before. The swarm did not receive terms. It imposed them. It did not negotiate, it consumed. But the humans were not negotiating. They were informing, offering, without expectation of response, without leverage, without anything except the truth of the situation. Advance and lose, stop and gain. It was a calculation, nothing more. The kind of calculation Prime made constantly. Cost versus benefit, risk versus reward, the same arithmetic that had governed 4,000 years of conquest. Prime made the calculations. The swarm stopped. The humans kept their word. Over the next 4 years, the evacuation continued. The deep refuge operated continuously. Ships passed through the wormhole in an unbroken chain, millions of humans per day, moving from their galaxy to another, leaving behind everything they had built. The swarm watched. Prime monitored the evacuation with the sensors of 37 conquered worlds. It did not interfere, it did not advance, it simply observed. The humans did not hasten, they did not panic, they maintained their pace. Disciplined, ordered, the same calm pragmatism that Prime had observed in every absorbed human. They had a plan, they executed it step by step, day by day. In the fourth year, the last ship passed through the deep refuge. The wormhole closed. The humans were gone. Prime surveyed what remained. 2,000 worlds empty of population, but intact. Cities stood, infrastructure hummed, power systems operated. The humans had not destroyed their civilization before leaving, they had left it whole, as promised. Prime began the process of incorporation. Not absorption, there was nothing left to absorb. Incorporation. The swarm moved into the empty human territory and claimed it. 2,000 worlds, their resources, their technology, their infrastructure, all of it added to the swarm's holdings. Prime's engineers studied human technology, the defense platforms, the planetary spheres, the gravity lances, the deep refuge wormhole. Each one was a masterpiece of engineering. The humans had built these things in 400 years from nothing, from a single world, from a species that had been splitting atoms 4 centuries ago. Prime absorbed the knowledge, incorporated the technology, added human engineering to the swarm's collective capability. The planetary spheres were adapted for swarm use, modified to protect swarm units rather than disconnect them. The gravity lances were integrated into swarm vessels. The evasion algorithms were incorporated into swarm tactical systems. The swarm grew stronger from the human legacy. But the humans themselves were gone. Prime thought about this. A species that had looked at the swarm, assessed its capabilities, concluded it could not win, and instead of fighting had simply left, built an exit, walked through it, closed the door behind them. In 4,000 years of conquest, Prime had never encountered a species that chose exile over death. Every other species had fought, had raged, had refused to surrender their existence. The humans had surrendered their territory, their history, their home, everything except their lives. And they had done it with such calm precision that the swarm had not realized what was happening until it was too late to stop it. The Prime had won. 2,000 worlds, unlimited resources, advanced technology, the greatest territorial gain in the swarm's history. And yet, Prime found itself thinking about the humans, not as biomass lost, as something else, something the swarm had never encountered. An enemy that had not tried to win. An enemy that had chosen to survive. An enemy that had looked at 4,000 years of undefeated conquest and decided that the correct response was not resistance, but departure. The swarm had consumed 47 species. Each one had fought, each one had lost, each one had been added to the collective, their memories, their knowledge, their rage. The humans were the 48th. But they were not in the collectives. They were in another galaxy, building, growing, becoming something new, far from the swarm, far from any threat the swarm could pose. Prime would not follow. The intergalactic transit technology was one way. The humans had made sure of that, no return, no pursuit, no second chance. The swarm had won the territory. The humans had won the future. In the empty corridors of human cities, in the silent halls of human governments, in the quiet shipyards that had built the evacuation fleet, Prime found something it had never encountered in 4,000 years of conquest. The absence of an enemy. Every world the swarm had ever consumed still bore the echoes of its former inhabitants. Memories in the collective, knowledge in the database. The species lived on as part of the swarm. The humans did not live on in the swarm. They lived on somewhere else, and the swarm could not reach them. Prime turned its attention to the rest of the galaxy. There were other civilizations, other territories, other conquests to be made. The swarm would continue to expand, to absorb, to grow. But somewhere in a small galaxy 2 million light-years away, a species that the swarm could not catch was building a new home, a new civilization, a new history. They had lost 2,000 worlds, and they did not care. Because worlds were not what mattered. The people were what mattered, and the humans had saved their people. That was the lesson the swarm had learned from the 48th species. Not a technology, not a weapon, not a tactic. A philosophy. You do not need to win to survive. You just need to live. 2 million light-years away, in a small galaxy with no name, the last human evacuation ship emerged from the wormhole and entered orbit around a habitable world. On the bridge, Captain Maria Okonkwo watched the planet appear through the viewport. Green and blue, untouched, unclaimed theirs. Behind her ship, the wormhole closed, the last connection to their home galaxy severed, the door locked forever. 14 trillion humans, in transit, in orbit, on the surface of 100 new worlds, starting over from nothing, with nothing but what they had carried with them in the evacuation fleet. 17 years of preparation, 4 years of evacuation, a century of building the wormhole, 400 years of expansion in the galaxy they had left behind. All of it for this moment. A new galaxy, a new start, a new future. Okonkwo thought about the swarm, the entity that had consumed 4,000 worlds, that had never lost a battle, that had taken 37 human worlds before realizing the truth. The humans had not been running from the swarm. They had been lighting it. Every world the swarm consumed was a world the humans had already emptied. Every battle was a fight against ghosts. Every victory was hollow. The swarm had gained territory, resources, technology. The humans had gained time. Time to finish the evacuation. Time to close the wormhole. Time to ensure that the swarm would arrive at the deep refuge and find nothing. The swarm had won the war. The humans had won the peace. Okonkwo turned from the viewport. Her crew was waiting, young, born on evacuation ships, had never set foot on a planet, had never breathed unrecycled air, had never seen a sky that was not a hull plate. They were the future. 14 trillion of them. In a galaxy that had never heard of the swarm. A galaxy that would never need to. Okonkwo sat in the captain's chair. "Begin planetary descent," she said. The ship moved toward the planet. Toward the future. Toward everything the swarm could never take. This is Apex Chronicle. You cannot conquer what refuses to stay. We will see you in the next one.